All right. Again, welcome everyone. So before we get started with the webinar, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Greater Washington Center for Employee Ownership. The GWCEO is a center that was launched by the Washington Area Community Investment Fund. We are a community development financial institution based in Washington, DC, that serves DC and the surrounding counties in Maryland and Northern Virginia. The mission of the Greater Washington Center for Employee Ownership is to provide resources and really be a central point for the employee ownership ecosystem in the DC region. We primarily help existing business owners convert their businesses to employee ownership, but we also provide resources for early stage cooperative businesses and all forms of broad-based employee ownership. We help people start, grow, finance, and convert businesses to employee ownership. And you can learn more at our website, which is gwceo.wacif.org. We're really excited again to partner with Gilded for this workshop. We have Ajoke Williams with us, who will be leading our session today, and she'll tell you more about Gilded. Before I turn it over to Ajoke, I just wanted to invite you all to be active participants in this workshop. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, or feel free to use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, or you can unmute yourself and feel free to jump in. And with that, I will turn it over to Ajoke. So Ajoke, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can feel free to share yours.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Ajoke Williams. I'm the project manager for Gilded, which is the cooperative under whose hood we'll be looking today. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. And then present. Okay, so I'll give a little bit of context about this meeting. Of course, like Jennifer said, this is a partnership between the Greater Washington Center for Employee Ownership and Gilded, which is an initiative of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. And the idea for this workshop was actually a prior workshop that WACIF did with a bookkeeping cooperative where they reviewed financial terms. And so this is an opportunity for you to get to see real world documents about a cooperative and learn a little bit about Gilded while exploring how some of the financial documents could affect the decisions of a cooperative. So before I get into the finance, I'm going to do some couching of, I say Gilded's a cooperative, but what does that mean? And what do we do? So cooperatives, like other legal entities or traditional or businesses, like other businesses, except they have a set of ethos of which they follow. Gilded as a business model and a cooperative is both freelancer owned and governed. We're a multi-stakeholder cooperative. So we have worker owners and then we have freelancer owners. And the goal of Gilded is to provide assets and governance power for a segment of workers who are traditionally left without power. What this means is how we do that is we help freelancers with their contract creation, which puts the power of bargaining back in their hands. So we would help freelancers write their own contracts that set their own rates and lay out the terms of intellectual property and any anything that's created during the process of a project or gig. We also provide guaranteed payments because we facilitate the contract process between a freelancer and their clients. And this means that if their client was to default, Gilded would be taking on the burden of either collecting from the client or paying until the client's able to pay Gilded. And so to do that, we handle invoicing and payment collection. and we have a legal firm which we contract with in order to provide our members and our users with legal support regarding their contracts. And lastly, because we handle the finance aspect of freelancers, we're able to use some of the revenue that we generate through that contract management to put in a general pool that all of the freelancers can access for worker benefits. So we offer things ranging from vision to dental to some form of primary care. So that's the business. This is a why we started Gilded as a freelancer cooperative. So the issues, or what you might call our value proposition, or the values that the challenge that we're trying to solve, is that there's a lot of wage theft and income volatility for freelancers. In addition, they have minimal access to worker benefits because there aren't any state and local legislation that helps standardize what's the baseline access to benefits that freelancers can get, and they have minimal worker protections because they're not protected under full-time employee laws. And we, like I said in the prior slide, try to mitigate a lot of these hurdles through the services that we offer. So this is just a brief review. The origin story of Gilded as an initiative of the Federation was through a partnership with Smart Co-op, which is based in the European Union, and being based in its headquarters in Belgium, they found that there was a huge economic opportunity in terms of capitalizing on the economic power of freelancers within that region. And so they have over 35,000 members to date. They started around 1998 when we did a survey about in the US of the freelancer ecosystem. We found that freelancers generate over $1 trillion. And so before we actually got started in our business, this was part of the lit review, for lack of a better word, or a market exploration we did to figure out what, number one, like, is there a market? Is the market financially viable? And also, how do we plan on capitalizing and accessing the market in order to provide benefits? So that was the economic origin story of Gilded. And this is the connection for you guys about why we're having a looking under the hood seminar or webinar, and why that's important for worker cooperatives. So in the beginning of the presentation, I started with Gilded as a freelancer cooperative, freelancer owned and governed. And some tenets of worker cooperatives that Gilded also adopts is that members have governance and decision-making power, and members have economic participation. I can get into more detail about the economic participation and specifics later, but the idea is that in order to fully leverage your governance and decision-making power in a cooperative, you have to have knowledge about the economic decisions that the cooperative is making, in addition to the tools and the information that those decisions are being made with. And so this is an opportunity to hopefully get you guys thinking about what are some of the questions you might be asking for your own cooperative as you bring members on. How might you present some of your financial information? How might some of the governance decision-making power feed into the economic participation and power of your members, and vice versa? How might the economic participation feed into the governance decision-making power? And our hope is that Gilded is that mechanism as a legal entity to facilitate that conversation between the two tenets and pillars of a worker cooperative, two of the main ones. So how do you assess the health of a cooperative? Like I started in the beginning, co-ops, even though they're based on a set of ethos around worker co-ops, making sure that there's the labor of employees and workers is compensated, not only fairly, but also through actual power. So members get to sit on boards, members get to sit on committees, members get to steer the cooperative. But that being said, cooperative at the end of the day, similar to an employee-owned business, it's still a business. And so you need a way to assess, how is that business doing? What are some challenges that might be coming in the next months or year or so? And how do some of the decisions that you might make now affect the future of the cooperative in addition to the immediate bottom turn? Because for cooperatives, worker cooperatives or employee-owned businesses, the health of the cooperative essentially affects the health of the members' bank accounts, because you guys get economic return for being part of the cooperative. So for Gilded, we use two main mechanisms: the balance sheet and the profit loss statements. And we're going to go through the balance sheet and also the profit and loss. So for these next slides, there are chances to ask questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat as well as they come on. And I do have a couple of questions that I'll ask you guys if you want to chime in. But yeah, this is more of the interactive section, so please feel free to provide feedback. So we're going to start with the balance sheet, which we typically use to provide a big picture view of a cooperative. Where are we going? Where will some of our future needs possibly arise from? And where will we need to strategize about where future funding can come from? And then for our profit and loss statements, we typically use for a more immediate look of like, where's our cash coming from? Where's it leaving? What expenses might we have to slow down on immediately? And so we'll go into detail about those two mechanisms now. So this is a summarized and kind of cleaned up version of Gilded's balance sheet. So Gilded, we started last year. We were incorporated last year. We don't have any full members yet because members haven't put any equity, but we have 7 to 9 people who are in the running to have full membership because they've met our membership criteria. So if we were to take a look at the real-time balance sheet for Gilded, what would we be looking for, and what would the balance sheet reveal about some of our future obligations? So here you can see this is a balance sheet running from January, the beginning of this year, until September. We have our assets, our liabilities, and our equity. The standard equation for looking at a balance sheet is that your assets have to equal your liabilities plus your equity. So right now, to date, we've made about we have $14,000 in the bank account, in our bank account, and we are owed about $300, and that's from the services that Gilded. And most of that revenue is generated from the main service that Gilded provides, and that's the contract creation and contract management for freelancers. You see that we have an accounts payable of $100, and that's for a contract that hasn't been paid yet, that Gilded is managing. And we currently have no member equity and just $100 of retained earnings from last year, which isn't a lot, which brings our net income to, actually there was an error there. Yeah, $14,200. Oh no, $14,300, that's fine. And so this, when you look at our real-time balance sheet, one question you might ask yourself is, well, what does this mean for our future financial obligations? Because it doesn't seem as if we have much to pay out in terms of liabilities that we owe, and it doesn't seem as if we have much member equity in terms of increasing the value of our cooperative. So how we typically use our real-time balance sheet, which is like, what is the stuff that's actually in our account? What is the money that we've made? We compare it to a balance sheet that we initially created right before Gilded got started. And that balance sheet was in our pro forma. And so the next slide, we're going to be switching back and forth, is our pro forma, which was to get Gilded up and running, what do we think is going to be needed in terms of what the money that we have in the bank, the assets that we might have to acquire, uh, liabilities that we have to make, whether that's like salary and equity uh, in order to increase the value of the cooperative. And so for year zero, we were banking on having grants for about $200,000. And that was going to be used to offset some of our liabilities, which was going to be the accounts payable, in addition to losses around getting accounts payable, which includes our guaranteed payment fund. That's the fund that's used to offset when clients don't pay Gilded. And then some of that grant money would also be used to help pay our regular expenses. And that's aggregated right now in our net income, which was expected to be negative 100,000. So that includes things like salary, benefits, some of the benefits for workers, some of the benefits that we'd be offering our freelance members and users, which we wouldn't have any revenue since it's year one in order to offset. So the goal would be to have money in the bank to offset some of these immediate expenses. And so you can see, where's that money coming from? So some come from checking, and then, we hope to have that in our checking, and that's coming from mostly equity. We would say member or outside equity. So either members putting in equity or us getting equity in the form of non-voting investment stock. And so by year one, we expect our savings to go down to just 1,000 because we've expended it. Bulk of it, we would want to expend it on the tech platform. Gilded is a tech platform, which is that Gilded is enabled through a tech platform, which allows for the contract management in addition to the benefit management for our users. What this means is this is important because one of our expenses, the largest expense that we expect, is going to be investment in an asset, which means it's not just an expense that reduces our net income, it's actually an expense that would add to the value of the cooperative. And then for this year, we also expect to have 100,000 accounts payable, and then a little bit more in terms of member and outside equity. So most of this, I had to combine it for this slide, but we're adding equity mostly from members. So that's the extra 3,000 that's added from year zero to year one. And then we still foresee ourselves losing income since we're still getting started overall based on all of our expenditures. And so if you were to compare the 2 years from like year zero to year one, you see some of our equity in the co-op is getting lower, and that's because we're expending money, which means that we're taking more of a loss in the beginning, and the goal is to take losses at a rate that allows us to grow the infrastructure of the cooperative while also not completely erasing the equity and the value of the co-op for our members, because we do want them to eventually see economic returns. So this is useful in terms of comparing where we possibly foresee where we might need to raise funds. So if you were to look back in what our real-time balance sheet is, you see that we don't have member equity and there weren't any investments put here because that was broken out. But the goal would be, okay, so we know that we have an asset investment of 150K that we need to make. How do we foresee ourselves meeting that value given that our income is not growing as much? Our net income to date is about 14,300. What are the different avenues for us to get that money in order to invest in something that would be an asset for the cooperative? So we've been exploring looking at grants to make that shortfall, in addition to working with some of our lawyers to see what are the investment mechanisms for non-voting members that we could possibly capitalize, because we know that the bulk of that money isn't going to come initially from our members contributing equity. So I'll take a quick break here to see if there are any questions about this section.
So there's one question in the chat. Oh, actually, no, it's Deshaun introducing himself. And for those who are going to be watching this recording later, Deshaun leads a cooperative development program at Catalyst Miami, and he's excited to learn best practices for cooperative finance management. So thank you for joining us today, Deshaun. And for others that are on the call, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And if you have any questions about this balance sheet, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or to drop your questions in the chat. I'm also curious, for those of you who are members of a cooperative or who have a traditional business, does your balance sheet look like this? Are there any differences with your balance sheet? So feel free to join the conversation.
So if there are no questions, one thing that I'll also add for Gilded is that we had a business consultant analyst come in and help us create our 1 to 5 year balance sheet pro forma before we started the business, before we fully incorporated. And that's been helpful to help us set benchmarks in terms of how much money we need to make, how much money we might need in the bank. And, in getting this set up, it's not shown here, but part of the challenge of getting started when you're a nascent or a new cooperative is figuring out, if you need funding, where do you put the funding if you haven't been fully incorporated, because you're still trying to wait for some of the projections and some of the due diligence work you need to do as a business. So we've been lucky as a cooperative for Gilded to be under the Federation, the U.S. Federation of Working Cooperatives, that has helped us manage some of the grant writing and grant receiving processes that we need as an organization in order to succeed. Do you also look at cash flow statements, and do you find it easier to look at balance sheet versus cash flow as a startup? Yeah, so we do look at cash flow statements. I mostly look at, just as a program, the profit and loss over a quarter or like a month, and we can get into that. Mostly, since we're still starting, the summary profit and loss is useful because Gilded has different buckets of funding. So instead of just having expenses and income, we also have this thing called our guaranteed payment pool. And that's more like a revolving loan fund. And we don't want to get that confused with, expendable cash that Gilded can use, because it's really the cash base that allows us to provide some type of insurance for our members that if their clients don't pay, we're going to be able to pay. So that money, has to be secured and kind of separate from our traditional cash flow. And our profit and loss statement typically helps us to keep gauge of that while also, looking at our expenses. Thank you for that question, B.A. Cockburn. Are there any other questions that folks have about either this projected balance sheet or the last projected balance sheet? So this is the balance sheet that we initially started out when we were doing the pro forma, and that's a financial tool that you would use before you start a business to gauge, how do you expect the equity of your business to change over a certain time period? And that would help you set things like, what is the share value in traditional uh, corporate lingo? Like how much the stock value, how much would you sell each stock? For cooperatives, it'd be how much would you sell each equity share if you have a projected equity of $500,000 at 4 years. Like, how would you set that up in the beginning? So we did a balance sheet pro forma as well as a profit and loss statement. Cool. So if there aren't any other questions about the balance sheet, I will move on to our other tool, which is a profit and loss statement that we would use. And Gilded is also unique here because some of our profit and loss is shared with our parent organization, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and we, since the grant money is passed through that organization in for certain projects, some of these expenses are externalized, so we don't see them. That's namely having to do with staffing. And I guess this is a good plug to say, as you're getting set up as a cooperative business or even an employee-owned business, it's helpful to have an entity that could walk you through some of the nuances of setting up either your staffed workers or your contract workers, because I know for each state has different regulations regarding, what are the benefits that you need if you have an employee, what are the minimum taxes you have to pay. So some of that has been externalized for Gilded. So for our profit and loss statement, like I was saying, for the answers, most of the service fees that Gilded has, we get through our contract management. So this is also from the beginning of the year until now, September 2021. This profit and loss statement doesn't reflect the full movement of money. This is more like a summary. So we have service fees about $7,000 that we've made. We've received grants for about $9,600, and that's some grants that we've gotten through the Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and we have a guaranteed payment pool of $10,000. So that's not really income, since it's not funds that we would be pulling down from exactly, but I included it here just so you guys can get an idea of some of the different aspects and buckets of how money moves that we consider. And then so far, our expenses have been around contractors. So those are people that we hire to do things like help us facilitate meetings, help us with media creation, comms, in addition to helping with membership recruitment. So we might get a contractor to do a short-term project to help us recruit more users. We spent about $3,000 on membership benefits. So those are things around vision, tax preparation for our members and our users, in addition to newer benefits that we're trying to incorporate now, which is access to financial planning cohorts. And then we have expenses for our bookkeeping, which is how we're able to use QuickBooks to generate these reports, which I pulled from for this presentation. So we get our total expenses. Oh, the net income here is wrong. I'm sorry about that. So it should not be 14,000. It should be 26,900. So looking at our total income and our total expenses, we would get our net income, and that's what's fed into our balance sheet. And that's how we use to assess, what is the value of the cooperative. So looking at this, what I would typically look for is, number one, look at the service fees and then go back into our our accounting software and see, okay, how are we doing in terms of, if I wanted to get more granular, how are our fees, how are we doing in terms of getting more fees over a period of time? So are we getting more contracts in? Are we getting less? Is this income mostly due to one large project, or is there some type of continuity? And since Gilded manages contracts, and that's we're a pass-through entity, I would also be looking at what's the lump sum of money that Gilded is passing through from the clients to our freelancers, and is there any time where that lump sum of money exceeds what we have in our guaranteed payment pool? And if that's true, it would mean that we would have to assess either getting a revolving source of revolving funds for a loan in order to offset that, or we need to figure out how we get extra funding, either from investment or a grant. And I'd also look at some of the expenses and see, because since Gilded wants to, are you trying to say something, Jennifer? Okay. Yeah, so how the member benefits that we are paying out, what percentage they are of the total amount of contracts that we bring in. So the service fee is the overhead. It doesn't capture the bulk amount of money that's moving through Gilded. And like you asked, BA, what that would mean is I would have to be looking at the cash flow for that scenario to see, what's the bulk amount that's flowing through Gilded, and then what percentage of that are we assigning to member benefits. So some questions that I put here that would be interested: what are our main revenue streams? Where might our expenses increase, and what expenses are not represented here? So our main member revenue stream on the business model sense is actually the service fees that we charge. Right now, the bulk of our income's coming from grants. And of course, we have that revolving pool of fund. And our expenses that we definitely know are going to increase are the member benefits, because we want to be allocating more of our funds to members. And so we need to figure out, how are we going to both increase the amount of our expenses at the same time while increasing our income, so we can fully support those expenses. And expenses that aren't represented here, but are useful when you're assessing the vitality of your cooperative, or things around your assets, things you would be putting towards the assets of your business. So there is that large asset expenditure, which we had in the balance sheet, which is the tech platform build out, which isn't represented here because, of course, it eventually increases the value of the crop, because it's something that we could either resell or license to another business that would be revenue generating for Gilded. And so that's useful to keep in mind, because it means, right now, just looking here, we're not at a stage where our daily profit and income was going to be enough to support some of these larger asset building components that we need for our businesses. And like I said, it's useful when you have the pro forma, what you started out with for your business, in addition to what you have in your actual accounts, you can make a comparison and start to think a little bit more strategically of where is some of this extra funding coming from. And also using the profit and loss statement, you're like, okay, we're not generating enough revenue to support some of these longer terms. What is the trajectory of our quarter to quarter, year to year revenue? And is there a certain point that we might want to transfer some of that money from our profit into some of our asset building? Or does that mean that we need to take on more debt? And so have like more of the money that in accounts payable, some type of loan with some interest rates that correspond to where you are financially. So I'm going to stop there
I have a quick question, Ajoke. So you mentioned that Gilded doesn't currently have any full members, but when members are eligible to join the cooperative, what is the member share? And then how are you factoring that income into your kind of projected profit or projected income?
Yeah, so membership, we have an equity fee of just $100. And it's not generally, that's not factored into income, it's just kept in equity, so it's increasing the value of the cooperative. And so that's going to be reflected in our balance sheet on a yearly or quarterly basis as we get more equity. So that's going to be used to offset some of the income losses that we might see in the beginning. Not in terms of we're going to be paying down our income losses with the equity, but on the financial accounting, the books, it's going to look like the equity is offsetting some of the losses. But it's essentially like a placeholder that a member would put down. Like, I bought my equity for $100. As the value of the cooperative increases, the equity fee is a one-time membership fee. As it increases, when I get my patronage account payout, I would get one commensurate with my equity share that I bought, in addition to whatever factors the members determine are applicable to figure out what your patronage account is.
Thank you. So just to recap for those who are watching the recording, they have a $100 one-time membership fee to join the cooperative. There are a few other questions in the chat, so I'll just read them aloud. The first is, how do you charge for contract management? Is it a percentage or a set fee? And how much is the fee or percentage?
Yeah, great. So Gilded as a platform, we charge a 6.5% overhead fee, and that's charged to the client. And what that means is that a freelancer would set their rate. I always use $100 because it's easy. And if the fee is $100, we would help you write up your contract. Your fee would still be $100. We would tag on $6.50 as a fee that your client pays. That's going to help. That goes to the overhead of us working with you to prepare your contract, and also putting funds in this aggregated collective pool so that you can eventually access benefits of Gilded. So it's 6.5% for each contract that you run through Gilded. It's paid by the freelancers or your client. So yes, and like Jennifer said, equity for all co-ops and employer ownerships should be a one-time fee. So if someone tells you your equity contribution is $300 every 2 years, you should look at them like they're crazy, unless they're telling you, the equity contribution is $600 and we have a payment plan if you cannot pay $600 upfront, and then they break that down. But there should be a single value that you're contributing for your equity. And after you contributed that total value, that should be the end.
There's another question in the chat, and it says, oh, did someone unmute? Okay. The next question in the chat says, do you create a projected profit and loss at the start of your fiscal year? And when did you look at pivoting on review of your financials?
Yeah, so we did create a projected profit and loss statement. Not at the beginning of our financial year. We created one when we started. So we haven't gone back and revised our P&L to take into consideration either like what we've learned or what we've learned either from our past P&L, like past quarters, or just the changing market conditions. But that is a good idea. I would encourage that. I think it's always easier to do a projected P&L. Of course, you have to do one for if you're doing business plans, trying to pitch for loans, trying to get investments to make people potential investments, or also loan officers understand the financial viability of your business. But it's also good to do one that's based on real-term data. And when did you look at pivoting on the review of your financials? Could you say a little bit? I'm not sure what you mean by pivoting in that question.
Hi, Ajoke. This is BA. Nice to meet you. So when I ask about pivoting, so you have 3 streams of income, and it looked like from your balance sheet that, I don't know, maybe you were looking at more. You can't really tell. So I'm wondering from your original profit and loss, projected profit and loss, whether there were other income streams perhaps that you were looking at and that you saw like maybe halfway through the year, you weren't doing what you thought you would be doing, and so you would pivot. So even like, suppose for your service fees, you thought you would make like, $50,000 for the year, and then you're seeing halfway through the year, you only made like $3,000, like what that pivot might look like as an organization.
Yeah. So the balance sheet isn't great at breaking down the streams of income generation because it aggregates them, right? So it's just, what is your net income? And it takes that value. So it doesn't really show you, in terms of the business engine, how are you making income? It just shows you how the value is increasing. So what we do look at though, in terms of, how the net income ties it back into the balance sheet, the things around equity creation for our business. And so one of the examples I gave is first the tech platform development. So if we look at the balance sheet, I'll go back there. You'll see that for year 1, we said that we wouldn't spend any money on tech development software, but we would put most of our money towards accounts payable, and that's for our purposes, part of our guaranteed payments that we would have to make for our freelancers, and then some of the money towards some of our expenses, which is represented in net income. But the following year, we said that we would try and raise about 150 so that we could invest in the tech software. So our net income, being that it's so low, ideally what we would see is like, okay, we're seeing that we're growing at like 10% at a certain rate, 10% every month. Either that means we need to increase the number of users of the platform, or we need to try and figure out what is another source of revenue in order for us to make that asset contribution of 150,000. So we would either adjust, our marketing, or we would say, okay, can we go after investments or can we go after grants to help us with meeting that asset that we want to eventually invest in? You could also see that in our balance sheet, we still show that we expect to be in the negative in terms of net income. And so one of the things that isn't reflected here is some of the salary contributions, because there are lots of parts and I didn't want to fully overwhelm the presentation. And so what we would look at is like, okay, what is the projected salary? How much does our net income offset that? Of course, we're going to be negative. So where are we getting that money in order to facilitate us running as a negative earning business, at least until the end of year 1? So we wouldn't be looking at our income per se. Our income just lets us know that, oh yeah, we're still generating, but definitely not at the amount to offset all of our continuing expenses, and also not at the amount to be putting money into our business to increase its value and its assets. And let me know if that was too long and you want a summary for that explanation, or if I didn't answer your question. Great. Are there any questions? Are there any, I guess I would love to hear from you guys who might be starting a cooperative or part of a cooperative, in terms of what do you look at? There's still more to the presentation, but what are some of the questions that are coming up for you when you either look at your cooperative's finance or when you think about creating financial sheets, mechanisms for your co-op? And I'm still here, I just have to get my charger. So.
I'd love to hear some of the projects that people are working on. Does anyone want to share about a cooperative project that they're a part of or thinking about starting? All right, shy crowd today, but Ajoke, you can continue with the presentation.
Cool. So we went through all of this, the more nitty gritty of Gilded, our profit and loss statements, our balance sheet. And we discussed, what are our main revenue streams, where might our expenses increase and what expenses are not represented here. We did all of that because ultimately all of the financial decisions affect the operation of the cooperative, and because Gilded is a freelancer cooperative and our main focus is helping freelancers obtain social safety net, which we define as a suite of benefits that most workers should be entitled to. Where our cooperative is financially in terms of health affects, the services that we're able to provide. So Gilded model for now, we provide healthcare access through partnerships with local clinics. That means our users and members get access to a primary care provider, which can take care of general health emergencies or health screenings. So that's like physicals, managing chronic disease, helping you get access to your pharmaceuticals. In addition, we provide tax preparation for our freelancers. So it's yearly tax preparation. We are working on quarterly. And then we do our back end invoicing, which helps with the income smoothing. And all of these services right now are encapsulated in our service fee. So we're providing them through the money that we generate from the service fee that our users, clients pay. So not our users, but the clients of our users. And what you could look at is, when you look at the profit and loss statement, you see that most of our money is, either from grants or the service fees. You start to think of, okay, is there another source of revenue that we need to consider based on the expenses that we have for our member benefits? So our members being able to see what our profit and loss statement is, can decide, look, it looks like we want to spend more money on benefits. We want to expand the benefits, and we would do an exercise like, what does that mean in terms of the expenses that we would be having? We could forecast for the next quarter and the next year. How does that compare to where we currently are? How does what we currently have in the bank facilitate, the benefits that members might want to add to the suite that we have? Does our financial position mean that we need to distinguish between members and users? Because right now, Gilded as a cooperative, if you process more than $750 through Gilded, you have access to all of our benefits. So, and you don't have to pay an extra fee. In terms of how our members could use that information, they could assess, okay, what does that mean for the financial stability of Gilded? They could use that information from the balance sheet and also the profit and loss to start to do more longer term forecasting in terms of what assets might we want to invest in as a cooperative. So the balance and loss sheet that we had didn't include any physical assets in terms of like buildings, but maybe workers feel as if it's important to acquire, maybe our members feel it's important to acquire a co-working space. And so they might acquire something like that. They might say, okay, we want to start putting some of our earnings, or we think the board and the organization should pursue more grants that would help us get to the stage where we can acquire. So yeah, so essentially we went through all of the sheets, and the balance sheet as well as the profit and loss statements, because at the core of the Gilded model is these services that we provide, but we can only provide them if we're financially viable, and we can assess both our immediate and our long-term viability using those mechanisms, those financial mechanisms. Oops, and I think that was the last slide for us. If you want to learn more, I'd mentioned a lot that Gilded is benefiting from being housed by the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and that helps us with a lot of our, like, being in the structure for where we can apply for grants and use nonprofit status under the aegis of a fiscal sponsor. Also having someone to help us navigate some of these expenses and take up some of the expenses that most startups have. In addition, so you can go to the Greater Washington Center for Employee Ownership and get consultations. This webinar was put in collaboration with Jennifer Bryant, which she introduced herself in the beginning. If you're interested to learn more about Gilded, which is a freelancers cooperative, you can visit us at gilded.coop, the website right here, or you can feel free to contact me. And my name's Ajoke, and you can contact me at ajoke@usworker.com.
Thank you so much for this excellent overview of how to review a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement. I'm sure people will take a lot away from it. And I'm sure that there are freelancers out there who would be interested in joining Gilded. So thanks so much for leading this session today. If there are any final questions, feel free to drop them in the chat now. And just as a reminder, we have a few upcoming events. We're going to be doing a session with Kathy Hum, who is with an ESOP that converted a few years ago, and she's going to be sharing the story of their conversion, and that is coming up in October. We have some other programming for National Cooperative Month coming up in October, and for those of you who are in the DC area, the DC Cooperative Stakeholders Group meeting is coming up on September 30th. You can find all of those events on our website at gwceo.wacif, which is WACIF.org. And we thank all of you for attending today. And we thank all of you who are watching this webinar later on. And if you would like to learn more about employee ownership or talk about the possibility of a conversion, feel free to reach out to us on the GWCEO website. And we hope you all have a great evening.